Jack Straw and David Davis have formed a gang of two to try to block the coalition's plan to give convicted prisoners the vote, following the European Court of Human Rights ruling that the law should be changed. Now they've been granted a motion to hold a Commons vote. Our political correspondent is here. Ian Watson, what are the implications of all this?
Well, ultimately, some MPs are saying this could be the first step on the road towards a constitutional crisis. Now, that might be a rather melodramatic prediction. There are some rather short-term implications as well. First of all, the government's not going to be too keen to have an emotive issue like this aired ahead of local elections in England in May. Secondly, David Cameron's meeting some of his key backbenchers tomorrow to chew over some tricky issues. I don't think he'd be too chuffed at the prospect of Conservative backbenchers and Labour backbenchers getting together on any issue, just in case during difficult times that becomes habit forming. I think what was also interesting was that David Davis and Jack Straw today were officially cocking a snook at the Strasbourg court that was imposing this, but really they were also having a go at the government's response to the court's ruling.
One of the main arguments by the Strasbourg court was that there had not been a substantive debate on the policy here. So what we're saying is, let's have an early debate on the policy now to influence the reaction of the Strasbourg court and the British government too.
And it's important that Parliament does that, not the government. They are different. The court has conflated Parliament and government. They're separate. And its parliamentary powers have been taken away. Parliament should stand up for itself.
So what is the background to all this?
Well, back in 2005, the European Court for Human Rights said that there could be no longer a blanket ban on prisoners' voting rights in Britain, and the Labour government at the time responded to this by precisely doing nothing. Now, they've started this for a while. Jack Straw did nothing. He was tempted, but there was an election looming, so he decided best not. So what the government is doing now is saying, look, we're now running out of time on this issue, and unless we actually make some start on addressing this issue by August, it could be that prisoners will be getting compensation of up to £100 million. But of course, they can't simply be worried about prisoners' rights. They have to be worried about the right wing of their own party as well. They've been a bit miffed recently to think that perhaps David Cameron's been too nice to Liberal Democrats. So at the moment, they're absolutely drawing a line in the sand on this. And there are thousands of prisoners serving 4 years or less for violent offences, sexual offences. So I think we've got a flavour of the kind of emotive issue for the government today when David Davis says it's unacceptable to give rapists votes.
Well, here you have this, as you say, slightly upset backbench. What happens next?
Well, this is going to be quite tricky. There's going to be this backbench debate probably in February. The government doesn't have a hope of winning this, so it's going to turn adversity to its own advantage and simply, I think, give MPs a free vote on this issue, allow them to cock a snook at Strasbourg on that occasion. But then they're still under an obligation to bring forward their own legislation to deal with the court's ruling, and that's when it becomes, I think, particularly interesting, because as far as I understand it, the government front bench, the opposition front bench could agree a compromise, perhaps giving prisoners a vote if they're serving a sentence of maybe a year or so, a shorter sentence. But many backbenchers are saying even that is unacceptable. If they vote that down, Parliament could then be in defiance of the court.
And
some MPs
prisoners could be getting £100 million.
Well, and equally, some MPs are relishing this because they're saying, actually, no, the Parliament should simply be in defiance of the court, don't pay them a penny, have a crisis, see where it settles, get Strasbourg's nose out of Westminster.
Ian, thank you very much. Well, I'm joined now by two Conservative MPs who find themselves on different sides of the argument, Peter Bottomley and Dominic Raab. Dominic Raab, first of all, perfectly legitimate to defy the European Court of Human Rights, is it?
Well, I don't think it's a question of outright defiance. Strasbourg itself said one of the problems with the current UK arrangements is Parliament hasn't considered it. And I think it's really important constitutionally.
But you don't believe in it whether or not they consider it or not, do you?
I don't believe in what?
In giving prisoners the
Well, there are two issues here. There is the moral clarity of saying if you commit a serious enough offence, actually, for a limited period within which you're in prison, you forfeit your right to vote. I think a lot of people identify with that. For me, it's a much bigger issue. The right to vote for prisoners was never in the Convention, was never in the Protocol. The goalposts have constantly shifted, and the question really is who's in charge, who writes the laws of the land? Is it Strasbourg, or is it directly elected lawmakers in
and here speaks a man who worked in Strasbourg.
Well, I work for Liberty, I've worked in Brussels. I'm not foaming at the mouth Eurosceptic, but I think there is a much bigger constitutional issue here about who writes the laws of the land.
Jack Straw's calling for a considered debate, is he right?
Well, let's just deal with Jack. Jack is jolly. Jack spent 5 years doing not very much about this. So I think we just leave him on one side, in the same way that the speech that Chris Brandt, who's now the Labour spokesman on these issues, finds his way of saying, I'm a right-winger. He's not. The Labour Party isn't. They failed to deal with this because they're a bit like that. Dominic actually made a really good speech when we had this last debate. I expect he will when we have our next one in February. So we aren't going to wait for the local elections. We're going to have a good debate. And
But you don't take Dominic's position. Who makes the laws of this land? Is it Strasbourg or is it our national lawmakers?
I agree with Dominic on that issue. We may or may not disagree or agree on whether prisoners should vote. For example, if I were in prison, I can go to church. You might say, if you commit a crime, why would you like to go to church? Why do you have a chaplain in prison? And that's equivalent to voting. But that's a separate issue to who makes our laws. We are bound by the European Convention on Human Rights, but I think he's right in saying that what is it for these judges to be saying that we should change our law? If they say to us, will Parliament consider it? The answer is we haven't, but we will.
Tell me, what do you think, if you know what Jack Straw's cunning plan is, or they didn't have a cunning plan, did David Davis have a cunning plan here, vis-a-vis the problems of the backbenchers?
There isn't a problem with backbenchers.
Oh,
the problem is a government one. The backbenchers haven't got a problem at all. The vast majority of them think votes for prisoners.
But it's a problem, whether it's the backbenchers or the government, there is a problem because there is a mismatch in consideration of who wants what.
There's going to be a debate. It's what Newsnight has. We have a debate on Newsnight. We have a debate in Parliament. You're in favour of that.
I'm always in favour of these debates, but
and in fairness, the Lib Dems and the Labour MPs in favour of votes for prisoners who turned up to Westminster Hall when we debated it. So we've got to debate this.
The thing is that the Conservative backbenchers are unhappy with all sorts of aspects of the coalition, some of them, and this is a way of saying you have to take us into consideration because we are feeling pretty neglected.
Well, look, I'm not going to speak for every backbencher. I'm a cup-half-full Conservative. I think what the coalition is doing is great on the economy, on localism, but I think there's something here which is slightly bigger than the froth of day-to-day media coverage and party politics, and it's this constitutional issue. And I put it to you, I think there's actually a point here we're missing in your clip and in this debate. I'm not sure 4 years would cut the mustard with Strasbourg. There's been some more rulings since where they've even more tightly refined what they think is legitimate, so that, for example, only offences that related to electoral fraud might in fact pass their test. Well, look, the goalposts are constantly shifting.
It's moving to electoral fraud and they get a vote. Is there a disconnect? Do people feel there's a disconnect in the party between David Cameron, the Prime Minister, and David Cameron, the leader of his party?
No. I think we can take this in a very clear way, and if more of your correspondents want to have a lesson from both of us, we can give it. Number one, Parliament
It'd be too expensive.
I'm free. Parliament is sovereign. We wanted the European Court of Human Rights to stop inhuman treatment. That's torturing people. That might be death penalty type things. It's saying people can't have the vote when they're out of prison. It's trying to have democracy. That's why that European Convention was created. We wrote it.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. Now, it's already the